Folks, we're going to start shortly. If you have your mobile phones, please ensure they're set to silent or vibrate. We need to use this mic for recording purposes or yes, yes. And the other thing is that if you do not want to be on screen, please move to a spot where you cannot be captured on camera. Sorry, sir. All right, so let's get started. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Pete Taxel, and I'll be your moderator this evening. I would like to welcome all of you to the first brown bag session hosted by the Association for Public Policy Analysis and Management regarding cybersecurity. I'm currently a PhD student at George Mason University. My research interests include information operations and the militarization of cyberspace. It's very difficult nowadays to turn on the news, check social media, open a news website, and not find a story that relates to cybersecurity. Now, depending on who you ask, cyber as it relates to government activities can be a noun, a verb, or an adjective. Indeed, cyberspace is ubiquitous and presents challenges to policymakers. The cost of entry is low, identification of actors is not readily apparent, and actions often take place at computational speed. Cyberspace is a domain in which actions can affect nation states and individuals, military and civilian, public and private sector, almost simultaneously. So with that in mind, we have a fantastic and very knowledgeable panel tonight, and I'm going to provide you with multiple perspectives regarding cybersecurity. Our panel includes, from your left to right, Dr. Ted Johnson, Defense and National Security Manager at Deloitte, Dr. Christine Pomerning, Managing Partner at Retaliate LLC and Adjunct Faculty Member at George Mason University, Mr. Antonio Skurlock, Chief of Cybersecurity Plans and Coordination at the Department of Homeland Security, and Major General Ed Wilson, Deputy Principal Cyber Advisor in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. So what's going to happen next is each panel member is going to introduce themselves a little further, give some details on what they do now, what their background was, and what their interaction or perspective is regarding cybersecurity. So last, and unless otherwise noted by our panel members, the views expressed tonight during tonight's session are those of the panel member and do not necessarily reflect the policy or position of APPAM, Deloitte, Retaliate LLC, George Mason University, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Defense, or the United States government. Without further ado, Dr. Johnson.
All right, so thank you. Thanks to APPAM for having me. As you said, I'm a Defense and National Security Research Manager at Deloitte. That's a position I've only been in for about a year. I retired from the Navy last year after a career in signals intelligence and cyber warfare, cyberspace operations. During my time in the Navy, I was a White House Fellow. I spent 4 years at the National Security Agency. I spent some time doing cyber operations on the Joint Staff in the J39. And I spent the last year and a half as speechwriter for the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So my cyber expertise comes from my active duty time in the military. I'm also a non-resident fellow at New America, a nonpartisan think tank down the street here. And finally, I'm an adjunct professor at Georgetown, where I teach a course on cybersecurity and national security policy. And that's kind of where I want to focus my remarks on today, and thinking about how the policy discussion lags far behind the technology when we talk about all things cyber. And the way we have tried to wrangle this cyber problem is to stuff this new idea into old familiar constructs. And so normally in my class at the McCourt School of Public Policy, I begin talking about Westphalia and how we're trying to shove a virtual domain into this concept of nation state from the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. As you well know, this is where the concept of the nation state was formed. Sovereignty became the organizing concept for the Western world at the time, which the rest of the world adapted. And it sort of solidified the notion that conflicts happen at the border. And it's with the understanding that there is a border that is recognized. And so for conflicts to happen there, the border is sort of a prerequisite. In cyber, as you well know, the border is much more nebulous of a concept. And so, yet we have still tried to stuff the cyber policy debate, cyber war debate, into this Westphalian concept. The other option is to think of cyberspace like the ocean, where it's a global commons, where everyone has access to the ocean. Everyone is free to operate in the ocean as they so choose, as long as they adhere to some international norms. And there is a debate going on the world stage now on whether cyberspace should be more or less Westphalia or more like the open ocean. Should states govern their portion of the internet and secure it as they do land and their airspace? Or is cyberspace open to anyone who can access it, and states are governed by norms that are agreed to? That's an open question that will flesh itself out here one way or another in the coming years. The second part of this is the sort of IR theory. When we think about international relations, lots of schools of thought, but the one that I find most fascinating, particularly from my perch at Deloitte, is from the Copenhagen School of Thought, this idea of securitization, of taking an issue and making it a national security concern. And one of the main pieces of the operating factors for securitization is the rhetoric. How you describe the problem is one of the three, I think, tenets that determine whether or not an issue is a security issue. And when we talk about cyberspace, we talk about cyber war, cyber attacks, electronic Pearl Harbors. We rarely talk about when our networks are pinged or there's a breach as an act of espionage. Certainly we do in the Pentagon, but every day in the news there's billions of cyber attacks happening around the world, and when a company is breached, they were attacked. And so this language sort of securitizes the policy debate around cybersecurity. And so that can be a good thing, and it can also be, it can have some other effects. Again, from the private sector perspective, if it is up to me to secure everything I do in cyberspace, then that means I am liable for the things I don't do. And liability in cyberspace is very expensive, or can be. But if it's an issue of national security, well, that's no longer really my responsibility. It's the government's responsibility to provide national security. When we think, one example of this is when we think about Sony and they were attacked by the North Koreans. It was not long before the government got involved in the attack on an international corporation on US soil, and left many wondering, why is the United States government, in the military to some extent, leaping to defend a private corporation that has just had some of its files compromised? Things like pay data and films not yet released. But that is the effect of securitization. It makes almost everything that happens in cyberspace a national security concern, which then completely flips the debate in how we address things like cyber deterrence and larger federal policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Dr. Palmer.
Okay, hello everybody. So I'll tell you a little about how I got here, which may not be obvious as a policy person, because it seems to be a mostly technical issue. At least in many people's minds, cybersecurity, that's a technical issue. And if anything, the only policy relevant question is possibly privacy. Now there's much more to it, and that's really how I arrived to be now doing cybersecurity. My background is actually in sociology, and organizational and industrial sociology. So I did a few things with that, mostly regional development and technology change and how it affects regional economies. And so that was about 20 years ago, so very early in my career. And so after that, turned out the new technology at the time, disrupting everything, was the internet. And so I got interested in that part of technology, technology development, technology governance, and so I wrote my dissertation, and I know some of you are in their stages of writing dissertations about internet governance. And funny you should mention that there's this big debate between what is cyberspace and where do we locate cybersecurity. Well, the same debate happened in internet governance. It's just not about security, it's about economic and business development. I actually, and I haven't thought about it forever, but I did write a paper very, very long time ago. It's called Westphalia Meets Tuvalu. Tuvalu, the little island. If you know anything about internet domain names, the country code for Tuvalu is .tv. And now, of course, .tv is also mean, most people in TV means television. And so very early in internet governance, the question was who owns this space? Is it nation states or is it businesses? Who is it open to? Who should benefit from it? Who should profit from it? And so this entire area of the public domain and the public or national responsibility, the private domain, so the business interest, and then the international layer on top of it, it really isn't that new. As you said, in some degree, we're trying to put sort of what is a new issue, relatively new issue, even though that's not true either, into sort of an older concept. But that's what internet and cyber space has been for a long time. It's in that space, and that really, I mentioned the term governance is policy, so and management, and so now as to more specific, where am I in that cybersecurity arena specifically? Well, I'm actually a bad fit for the panel because I think it says cyber attacks or warfare, cyber threats. Well, that's just one part of the spectrum, and my colleagues here can speak much better to that than I can because I'm not on the threat side of the equation. It's the vulnerability and the consequence management. So it's the risk management parts that deal with our weak systems that we have designed ourselves and implemented ourselves, running ourselves, and that we really neglect to secure adequately. Just to mention the example, all the hospitals that got hacked, ransomware was deployed, and they couldn't defend themselves because they ran Windows XP, and that's no longer supported, and so they were basically an open door. But that's something you can do about. Threats, really difficult. Who's your adversary? What do they want? So what I do, both in my consulting hat at Deterrence, as well as when I teach in master's programs in information security, is really look at the structures, the infrastructures from a management side, and also consequence management, really. I mean, we need to think about more what happens when something happens. As you mentioned, something happens all the time. How do we recover from that? So it's the vulnerability and the consequence management side, the recovery side that I really can speak to, and would love to do that today. Thank you.
Dr. Pomeranian, thank you very much. Mr. Skirl, please.
I'm going to leave that mic for you guys. We're going to use this one. I'm just kidding. Actually, it's probably a bad idea. I'll take yours. It's got a green light, and this one has an orange light, and green works better
that's
for me.
because...
Sweet. So, wow, I found myself in an interesting spot. I agree a little, and I disagree a little. And I've been walking the line my whole life. So, a little bit of background. I was an enlisted sailor, and then I decided that wasn't enough powered entry for me, so I became an officer in the Navy, and I retired. Oddly enough, though, I spent my graduate time with the Air Force at the Air Force Institute of Technology, where I learned quite a bit about the differences between the services. They call us sister services, but trust me, having 6 daughters, which I do, and I understand exactly how cliquish and catty they are. And I'm saying this as a father of girls. Trust me, sister services does not mean we get along well. So I come from a perspective of being underway at sea, just right outside adversarial territory, but also in a piece of agreed upon safety, international waters, not safety, I'm sorry, an agreed upon space that we say it's okay to transverse as long as I'm heavier than you. The law of tonnage always prevails. If you're bigger, you could tell smaller folks to get out of the way. It's not a bullying thing, it's just about maneuverability. That being said though, I think that there is a part of the lexicon that dictates a certain mindset associated with cyber. But I also find that I'm okay with that. I'm okay with terms like war, which, as far as I'm concerned, from a legal definition, war is war is war, whether it be cyber or physical. It doesn't matter. But in my department, we don't really care about that war part because that's not our domain. We're not the War Department nor the Department of Defense. We are Homeland Security. So from a work perspective, from a professional perspective, the idea for us is reconstitution, right? Being able to have resilience, survivability, this thing that, although is not quite a public utility, but is treated like one, is become such a part of everyday life that someone believes that we should protect it, almost to the point of it being a utility or something that we must all have. As far as how far back I started, well, I'll tell you, I was in this thing for a long time. All I care about is speed. I need fast internet to play my online games. I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons since Dungeons and Dragons wasn't cool. So you can hear a lot of Dungeons and Dragons references up here. I have embraced my geek and my nerd to a degree. For instance, all cyber is an MMORPG. Do you guys know what that stands for? A massive multiplayer online role-playing game. It means that we have gone into an environment with alternate persona to do things in ways that we've never thought that we could do in a non-physical environment, to have an effect in a distant land or on other soil or in other environments to such magnitude that we can be either recognized, influenced, or, I don't know, have fun. So I know that sounds pretty simple, but is that not what either nation states or actors or other folks are trying to do? With regard to coming after a private entity, whether it's data, espionage, trying to get ahead of the game, or somebody who decides that all children should go outside on Christmas Day. So I'm gonna hack into the Sony network and the Microsoft network so they cannot register their Xbox and their PlayStations and force them to go outside. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that actually happened. A young man decided that he would impact those two networks and force children to go play. Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? That, whether we like it or not, is a terrorist act. What I've done is I've influenced you by my mindset and my thought process. I've taken away your ability to exercise your right to do what you feel like you need to be able to do. No, I don't believe that he was charged with that. If you look at the definition, it's there, right? But it's a hard environment to be in. I don't believe the gentleman was of age to be prosecuted as an adult. Matter of fact, I don't know if he was prosecuted at all. But that did happen. And I was upset because my Xbox would not register, and I had some issues. But I got over it after the 12-hour outage. But you know, we laugh about it. But now you take that to a little bit more of an exponential degree, and I've stopped the flow of electricity. I've turned ships around. I've caused rescue helicopters in the mountains to go to the wrong GPS locations, and therefore people died because the helicopters didn't get there in time. You cite it any way you want. I can make it sound simple, I can make it sound critical. The thing is, it's all plausible and possible. And you do not have to have a lot of money to get involved. But I do agree with this. Our laws, our policies are trying to catch up. But good guys have always been hampered by having to follow the rules, right? We all know that. So the bad guys don't. They share information open and freely. Classification means nothing to them. And oh, by the way, attribution is a very difficult thing to do. You give up something called sources and methods, how you got it. You have to prove it. Then we get in a court case. We say we don't want to prove it because it's classified. We got to let somebody go. Look, I'm just talking about all of these things that go on. It's simple, this cyber thing, right? And yes, there are individual entities out there who function like nation states. They've decided their boundary is no particular boundary save that which their trons can flow over. They've decided that their politics or whatever they feel like they are, right or wrong. Any of you who does something that everybody else doesn't like, we're going to go after you. Contrary to belief, that's a political viewpoint. And if I have the capability and wherewithal, and a group, and the organizational structure, and I have those who lead, those who follow, well, I might have a little bit of a nation-statish type feel. Governance, right? So take those words for what they mean, which is not much coming from Antonio Spurlock. But if they get published in a book, and you take a class, and you've got to write a paper on it, it means a lot to you. And you may find these types of things being said to you. So cyber is difficult. It lets you go places that you can't normally go. Go outside of your country's boundaries, for instance. See things that your country won't let you see. See things your mother and father won't let you see. See things your dad doesn't even want you to know about till you're 18 years old. But the point is, it provides a lot of movement, momentum, power, freedom, access. These are all words that we think about growing up, that we hear about. They're on the national landscape. Now, once you have all those things, you want people to protect you from them. Ensure that you have that capability. You want them to teach you how to keep folks from taking those things from you, or impairing you, or better yet, watching you while you utilize it to understand who and what you are, how you function, when you'll be where you're not going to be. I do not check in on MySpace to let people know that I'm actually out of the country for a week and the car sitting in my front yard really doesn't mean anything. People don't think about these things. And oh, by the way, the asset of the day is information. Give it to me or I take it from you. Either way, you have granted me something more valuable than any currency that I can currently think of today. Sir?
I'll try, let's see.
All right.
Let an old guy hold on to a microphone.
Older guy.
Yeah. All right, I give up.
There it is. Green is good.
Green is good, right? So for those who know me, Ed Wilson, in the Air Force, obviously. Unfortunately, I didn't qualify to get into the Navy. The Navy said no. The Air Force said yes. And so that was 36 years ago. And so 1981 joined the Air Force. Military kid, grew up, my father was in the Air Force as well. So that's kind of my rootstock, if you will. Been an officer for 32 years. So how to get into this cyber thing? Air Force Academy graduate, electrical engineering degree, primarily in the digital arena, computers, etc. Kind of geeky stuff. I embraced my geek early too.
What you got, boss man?
I worked as a telecom technician in high school for my dad, a little regional telecom company. So that's how I got into the business. When I graduated, went into space operations, space acquisition. So kind of a Desert Storm era kind of guy. I had to bring very high-end technologies into a tactical fight for national security purposes. Spent a lot of time doing that. For a guy that can't see very well, it was a great way to serve the country and partner up with guys that knew were downrange and flying jets. And so about 8 years ago, got asked to switch over from space operations over to cyberspace operations. So that's what I've been doing, and that's my background. People sometimes ask me, in life, what's your biggest accomplishment? I always brag about been married to the same lady for 31 years. I think that's probably my biggest accomplishment. So pretty blessed that way. Just a couple thoughts from a DoD perspective. I serve here in the Pentagon on the Secretary of Defense's staff. Can have two duties right now. The acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Cyber Policy, so I get to sit in a lot of meetings discussing the nation's policy with regards to cyber. And then I also serve as the Deputy Principal Cyber Advisor to the SecDef. And so in that capacity, we deal with international partnerships, workforce development, defense of our what we call the Department of Defense Information Network, the DODN, we call it, the defense of those assets, and all of the above. So get kind of an interesting perspective sitting where I sit. Previous job was basically in charge of cyberspace operations for the Air Force out in the field. So anybody had a comm unit or both the offensive and defensive capabilities was responsible for those assets. Just a couple of, there was just in the first volley here, a couple of challenges I see for the nation, but principally for the Department of Defense. One is, from a policy perspective, we typically build policy around norms and precedent. And so when you look at the legal framework and the policy framework that we have in cyber today, when you say cyber, that's a big term. There's a lot going on in cyber. It can be difficult at times. It's not a physical domain. I explain it this way to my flying buddies. When you fly a plane or you're in a ship or anything, there's certain physical laws, Kepler, Newton, Bernoulli, that are at play. And that kind of drives the behavior of how you conduct operations in traditional military operations, kinetic operations. In cyberspace, it isn't the case. It's man-made domain, so you have to think about it a bit differently. What drives that behavior? It's a little different. Is it Moore's Law? Not really. Our normal traditional way of chopping resources over in terms of control when you cross a line on a map doesn't really work. The sovereignty issue is a bit fungible at times. It's very difficult to chase that electron across a physical border. If there's a piece of information sitting on a server in a country, what is the status of that information? Does that belong to the country? It actually is a commercial asset. how does that happen? How do you treat that? Whether you're going to try to exploit that, attack that, defend that, that's a difficult problem at times. A little bit easier when we're in our own networks. Got all the authority we ever wanted. I think we're getting pretty good at it. And I think I've been very fortunate to watch the maturation of that in the Department of Defense mature to a point where I think we're fairly effective. I think one of the biggest challenges for the Department of Defense right now is this thing called the Internet of Things. And we begin to see it in some of the incidents, if you want to call them attacks, events, however you want to describe it, where people are using the connectivity, the interconnected nature of the network today, of the internet, and be able to reach out and touch devices, whether that's a medical device, whether that's a camera, microphone, printer, or a computer. The traditional thing we typically deal with is a computer or a gaming machine, those types of things, a processor that's on board. But we're quickly beginning to see that migrate into industrial control systems. If you followed Ukrainian, power attack, the Ukrainian attack, the attacks in Ukraine with regard to their power grids. Here recently, over the last few years, been a couple of those very high profile in the press, and I can keep going on and on and on. There seems to be a new one about every week or two now. That creates a lot of risk for the department from a national security perspective. So how do you defend not just computers and networks out there, but all of that attack surface in military language? That's a difficult task. So for me, I believe that's one of the grand challenges for the department. That's not unique to the Department of Defense. My colleague here in the Department of Homeland Security, that's even a bigger problem. Is how do we do that for the nation? And I would argue that for the world, in a modernized world, that's really one of the challenges we have right now is when you have a nefarious actor, how do we defend, how do we secure, how do we protect the things that we hold valuable as a citizen in any of the countries. One of the others, I think, challenges we have today is growing the workforce. That's not just a DoD problem. A lot of people ask us in the Department of Defense, are you having trouble recruiting individuals and then retaining that talent? We can talk about a lot of policy, we can talk about a lot of capabilities, but if you don't have the people, they're kind of the force multiplier. They're the secret sauce that makes all this go. I think one of the challenges for the country and for the nation is growing the right workforce. It's really a traditional STEM problem, science, technology, engineering, math kind of problem. It manifests itself in a little bit different way. In the Department of Defense, we don't have a recruiting problem. We have lots of volunteers and lots of qualified people. A lot of people with their hand up in the air that want to come into this mission set. To date, we don't have a big retention problem, but we're beginning to really pay attention to that. We always say we'll probably never compete on salary, especially for our young enlisted troops. It's very difficult to compete on salary, so if somebody's going to depart service, no matter what service, for salary, it's a hard thing to fight against in terms of compete with. What we find today is if we bring folks aboard, they come aboard inside any of the services, Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, etc., and we get them focused on a mission, get them excited about the mission. It's amazing how many people will stay, and especially if they're doing things that are very unique to the national security involved in the country. It's amazing how many people stay despite the lack of salary that's associated with it. And the fortunate part is we don't have to keep all of them. We do. I like being able to work with people that are out in industry or academia, think tanks, etc., that have former military backgrounds. I think that's part of our contribution to the United States at large. And so, love to talk a little bit more about that if folks are interested in talking. So I'll cut my comments short and look forward to your questions.
All right, so we're going to go to questions in just a moment, but as you saw, we worked our way from left to right on the panel. Both Antonio and General Wilson were able to basically add comments to the previous. So, Ted or Christine, is there anything you would like to comment on what the last two panel members had to say, or point to disagreement, or if you'd like to retort, this is the time.
No, I mean, I think we're pretty much all on the same page here.
Okay.
What I will say from the industry perspective, and I think this was actually mentioned, the thinking has shifted from how do we stop from being attacked to what do we do after we've been attacked, after we've been compromised. So this notion of resilience is becoming more important. The other part, and the reason that is, one is because security, perfect security, is one, unattainable, and near perfect security is really expensive. And so what industry is learning is that if we can't be as secure as possible, then what level of risk are we willing to accept that's aligned to our business, our bottom line? And bringing cybersecurity into the boardroom to be a business decision along with all the other traditional decisions that large corporations have to make is cybersecurity is the new entry to this conversation. It's more present than it has been, but it's still, the technical nature of the problem is still a bit scary, I think, to a lot of board members and leaders of organizations, but they're realizing that if they don't wrestle with it proactively, then the Washington Post headline will force them to, and their stockholders, will force them to reckon with the problem. And so thinking about cybersecurity, not in terms of the best security possible, but in terms of the best business decision for the security we can afford in accordance with the risk we're willing to accept, is sort of the paradigm that's descended on industry that is much different from what the government's responsibilities are.
Yeah, so just to reiterate one point, and one part of my vita, I suppose, I left out, so it's the middle part, from economic development to internet governance and now cybersecurity is really infrastructure security. So, and in that arena, it's not even called infrastructures anymore. Well, it is, but it's really cyber physical systems. So that's a new term. And what it really signifies is that there's absolutely no part of what we used to call infrastructure is public works, the electrical grid for one, but also health systems, that is not part of now the cyber space. With all the implications for workforce development, with all the implications certainly for development of the endpoints, which are multiplying, and so just like any new technology development, I think while there is a lot of things we're still unclear about and we're trying to catch up with, I would also argue that it's really it's incremental. So we're making incremental progress. It's not a completely Wild West. The cyberspace is not Wild West. It might feel like that too, in many instances, but there are laws that apply. There are regulations that apply. Certainly, the highly regulated industries are doing a much better job at catching up. Because it is just compliance is a very big part, and so it's not perfect, but it is certainly a field where policy can make a big difference, and we're not starting from nothing, right? And also the international arena, I think, as well. What's illegal here is most likely illegal in other countries too. So there is a framework. It may not be well enforced. It may not be attributable. But there is a framework that exists already, and so we just need to build on it and really need to build capacity to deal with it.
Excellent, thank you. So the way it's going to work, you can ask this question specifically to a panel member, or you can just throw one out there, and then as they feel comfortable, they'll weigh in. So I'm the moderator, so I get to ask the first question. Now this is also a pitch for APPAM. Membership guys going to come up again in the fall. So if you want to be the moderator today, if you make sure you get your question asked, make sure you talk to Nathan after this. Okay. So, and actually, it's couldn't have said any better. So between our last few speakers, we talked about cybersecurity and also how to respond. So I'll throw this up to the panel in general. So one of the recent attacks we had was ransomware called WannaCry. So the question becomes, what's appropriate for the private sector? Should they be allowed to respond and they get a cyber attack of their own, or are we just going to worry about resilience? So I offer that to the panel.
Perhaps you can just go around and say yes or no. Is it okay or is it not okay? I'll start. No, it's not okay.
I would concur. It's not a good idea.
I think if a private corporation begins to take action, they're going to get retaliated on even more. That said, through the legal frameworks, we are beginning to see more and more private corporations respond in cooperation with legal activities. And so for law enforcement activities on an international scale. So especially the larger telecoms and the larger IT industry is being much more forceful in that arena. And so there's I think that's a great movement in terms of prosecuting offenders out there.
Yeah, I say no as well, but I will offer a caveat, and it's they should not retaliate beyond their network. But I think actors on their network, they should be able to, and this is a term that we used to throw around in defense, actively defend, to sort of aggressively push people out, but then sort of stop at the point of, wherever they determine their border is, to stop at that point, and going beyond that, I think is beyond their authority, responsibility. I think that the nation has organizations in place to handle those things.
Excellent, thank you. To the floor. Yes, please.
Thank you. When I speak in the public audience, I can lose some language. So, because I'm an international student from Russia, in American University, I'm a grad student studying specifically cybersecurity. So I have a very specific question because I'm currently interning for Asia Pacific Domain Name Association. You are familiar, I think, with these guys. So they are very much interested in IoT, and I'm making a research on IoT and their connection to DNS system, to domain name system. So my question to you is, do you see any future for domain names in IoT industry? If yes, then how? Can they help to structure common protocols, establish common rules? Or will be like second, third level domain names and there is nothing to do for the domain industry at all because of new protocols? What would be your opinion here? Thank you.
Well, the domain name system has multiple layers, as you know, and the one that was really critical in even enabling IoTs is the IPv, is the Internet Protocol. The expansion to IPv6, which quadrillion the number of available addresses, and so that is of course necessary to address the Nest at home and the Fitbit and whatever it might go online. So if it comes to the Asia Pacific folks or other domain name registrars and registries, I don't see as much a role of the domain name system on that layer, so long as the IPv6 is implemented. But that might change. The technology changes so quickly, and not being somebody who codes things, I don't know. Maybe somebody has started doing that. But that's certainly, from my point of view, it's the IPv6 was a critical change, and that's being undertaken.
I find it interesting that really it's a focus. From my perspective, domain names, when they initially came out, were useful. I actually don't feel like there will be that much utility for them in the future. It's almost like a persona. At some point in time, now we generate names on the fly for our children, for things, people, places. The domain name piece is so restrictive that at some point, I think you'll run out of how to quantify or qualify people, place, or thing with a domain name. So they have the utility at a certain level, but then it just kind of, to me, it's just going to get to be ridiculous, and you won't be able to follow it. But again, that's based upon the current domain name structure. Maybe something brilliant will come out in the future that will fix all of that. But to me, you can only go so far with that. And then you'll just get into nonsensicalness. Not saying that people have gotten nonsensicalness with names, but the truth of the matter is, now naming conventions are about product placement, capability, capacity, what's it for, who's the audience. Well, the scope and the depth of that is going to get extremely broad over time. Versus being more narrow. So I don't think the current architectural structure of the domain name will be able to facilitate that. Or if it does, it's like trying to get a new, unique email address nowadays. It's very difficult to do. Antonio.Skirlock12345 is not unique, but it's available. I hear.
Excellent. Do we have another question? Yes, sir.
I have two sort of esoteric questions, which I think General Wilson and Dr. Johnson would be the best people to answer, but I think the others might as well. The first question is, the Talon Manual 2.0 came out, I'm familiar you all with it, but given your comments and given the fact that it's a quite a factor of your life, what criticisms of the manual's approach to the law of cyber operations do you have? And then the second question is sort of an invitation. It's a really good article in actually yesterday's Financial Times, given the time difference, called "The Battlefield is Everywhere in the Digital Age," which makes the argument that our focus on hardware in terms of weapon systems is misplaced, because we can basically accomplish a lot of the things virtually through cyber things, so that spending money on large aircraft, et cetera, is actually a waste of money. And I would love to hear your reaction to those ideas.
Go ahead.
And I'll email anyone who wants.
Can I
the
split the
article.
difference on the Talon Manual question between
Yeah.
the two? 'Cause that's-
Yeah.
So first of all, I read it. I was at the release, and I actually don't have any issues with it. I think that it has made a leap and a bound from the first release to the 2.0. And to be honest with you, it's nice to have that somewhere to reference. And I know a lot of my lawyer friends who are doing just that. It isn't often in a new environment, in a new arena, that we say new from the standpoint of it being almost ubiquitous, that of the internet, that of cyber, that of whatever intrusion or abilities, you name it. And then having a reference for, at least from a nation state standpoint globally, what they think about that. The word was failure, to be honest with you. First time I heard it was 2 years ago. Now I can't escape it. All I'm saying is, but it's a thought process that has now become the norm. And I think that's great. Could you imagine that in any other environment? Tank warfare, air warfare, naval warfare. Years before people could grasp those concepts and become awesome at it. Now we have, and I'm not trying to say that Talon Manual is the most awesome thing out there, but it's an awesome start. So that's my view.
So I'll start with the Talon Manual. So we were involved in, not the actual writing, but the coordination on it. So no significant issues from the Department of Defense's perspective with the current manual. I think the challenge to me is this domain is changing so quickly. So I'm trying to remember in the back of my head from Talon 1.0 to 2.0, how many years? It's been a handful or less. I don't recall.
Just over 3 years.
Yeah, 2 or 3 years.
2013 Talon Manual 1.0 came out, and then just January this year is when we saw 2.0.
So about 3.5 years.
Yep.
And just for everybody's benefit, so what's that in particular?
So-
The military space people know, but civilian people maybe not so.
Sure. So the Talon Manual documents international norms of behavior in cyberspace. And it's a collection from a collective body that comes together on an international basis. Many countries, it's a mix of government and think tanks that come together to bring that forward. I think it's a very unique effort. The piece that always strikes me personally is how quickly it's changing. I think in any other domain, as we've laid out norms of behavior in terms of where we've been as an international community, I've never seen documents similar to that in any other domain that changes so rapidly. I think that'll be one of the challenges as we move forward. And if you think about it, it's really reflecting what has occurred in the past, not necessarily what's occurred in the future. And so as the norms change, as new technology comes out that is not supposed to be anchored in technology, but I think we'll see iterations of the manual in the years to come. With regard to the need for weapons versus just cyber, I think, at least in my lifetime, I don't think I'll see in anybody just about in this room, I think there will always be a desire from a nation state to have some form of the ability to have the use of force in the form of kinetic operations, whether that's some mix of air, land, sea, space, et cetera. The ability to defend the nation as well as project power when required. And so while cyberspace operations offers many options, and I think those options are becoming more lucrative.
I'm not saying either or would be ridiculous, but it has to do with degrees.
Absolutely. So that's where I'm headed, is I think in the future you will see more and more cyber capabilities that begin to roll forward. And the challenge I hinted at was in the Internet of Things, the language we use in the Department of Defense now is mission assurance. If you want to think about it like business continuity or resilience, we're beginning to think of mission assurance. And it's building resiliency, not just in the fighter, not just in the aircraft carrier, not just in the tank, but in all of the critical elements, the infrastructure required to maintain. So for, again, for my Air Force friends that are out there flying jets, is how do we keep the airfield operating? How do I move fuel to the flight line? How do I keep power moving into the maintenance bays? That's spare parts delivered on time in a contested environment. It's a very challenging, in a really high-end contested fight that includes cyber actors coming against you. That's what we're grappling with from a national security perspective. So I think you will see more and more threats, sophistication and proliferation of those threats, and the complexity of the types of attacks that we see. That's the challenge when we're trying to guarantee for a commander out in the field mission assurance. Can I defend? Can I protect? Can I fight through the hurt, right? Am I resilient? I love the Navy model, and I got blamed for the other day. I was on an Army panel with Navy and Air Force reps, and I've used a Navy example in an Army panel. And so it's an Air Force guy, it's pure joint, I love Admiral Rogers uses this example. He's the commander at U.S. Cyber Command up north at Fort Meade. And having been my operational boss for a couple of years, I got to listen to him quite often. He uses the analogy of a skipper on a ship. And so, when a skipper on a ship starts taking fire, he doesn't turn around and sail back to port and, re-outfit and then come back into the fight in a few days. You fight through any kind of an attack. That's the kind of mindset we have to have. And I think that's what we're beginning to see in business, is to be able to actively defend, be resilient in whatever business operation you have. For the military, for the Department of Defense, that's what you expect as taxpayers, is we need to be able to fight through that degraded, contested, what we describe as an operationally limited environment. That's what we expect. Because we do that in every other domain, this is no different. And so those principles of war that we have adopted for centuries now really do apply. Speed, agility, precision, mass. I'm not quite sure what mass looks like in cyberspace, but deception, all of the principles that we typically think of, I think apply in cyberspace. So.
Yeah, and very quickly, I'll address your, the battlefield is everywhere piece. Beginning at the talent manual, I think it's good to have it written down because you need to know what the norms are. The question is what happens when those norms are violated. If there is no power, no punishment, no penalty, then it's just a great document that has, that people who already agree to it can sit around and agree some more, but then doesn't reach further than that. So in thinking about the battlefield is everywhere, in some regard, the battlefield has kind of been everywhere for a little while now. It's the electromagnetic spectrum. We've been fighting there for not quite a century, but certainly the latter part of the 20th century, the electromagnetic spectrum became more and more important to warfare. Now with the Internet of Things, the proliferation of cyberspace and devices that can connect to it, the battlefield is almost everywhere. And to the General's point, it is a question of the degree to which the physical space and the virtual space, where the battle is waged, and sort of along the rheostat there. One of the concepts that we've been playing around with at Deloitte, myself and retired 4-star General Chuck Wall from the Air Force, is this notion of operational omnipresence. How can you operate everywhere, either physically, virtually, or through your ability to monitor where you're not physically or virtually, and combine all three of those things and all the data that the sensors capture to be able to project power even when you're not physically present. And virtual presence gives you that ability. It also hinges on the Internet of Things in the sense that those sensors that are everywhere are always collecting data, much like satellites can do depending on their orbit. So it harkens back to the days of when prisons, the concept of a panopticon, where you've got a prison yard and this big tall tower in the top, or it's sort of in the middle of the yard with tinted windows, and prisoners never know if someone's in the tower watching them or not. And so they behave because if there is someone in the tower and they break a rule, they'll be shot or whatever. But if no one is in the tower and they don't know it, well, they can't take the chance of someone being there, so they behave anyway. So this idea of promoting that you have an awareness of what's happening where you're not physically and where you're not virtually allows a level of control over an adversary's decisions that makes them believe that the battlefield really is everywhere, to include sort of the mental calculus that has to happen when you decide to take an action or not. But again, the faulty piece of this is if there is no one in that panopticon and you break the rule and there's no punishment, now it begins to lose its effectiveness. And so it sort of takes us back to where I started at the Talon Manual. These tools are excellent, but when there's a violation, there must be some price to pay, or it's just very cool technology, it's very good progressive policy that moves the football down the field but doesn't really get us where we want to be.
We have time for one more question. Michael.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming here today. So my name is Michael. I'm actually somewhat of a practitioner. I work at the National Governors Association where I focus on cybersecurity policy. And I'm fortunate enough to talk to a lot of state CIOs, Homeland Security advisors, get to work with great people in your department. I want to touch upon a theme that I was touching on earlier, in that the diction of cybersecurity is wrong. It's not really security anymore because, to your point, there's IoT, but it's really wrong to think of it as IoT. It's just things. I mean, it's a computer on wheels of a car. It's a computer that tells you time for watch. It's a computer that cleans your floor with a vacuum. And as a result, you have tons of entry points for malicious actors to penetrate systems. You talked about hospitals earlier. It happens in 911 dispatch centers. And as a result, no matter if you have the strongest security in the world, the greatest and weakest link is the people, it's us. And so I think workforce development is one of the key issues, but the other side of the coin, I think the larger issue is educating individuals, and it's this notion of cyber literacy, because it frustrates me when I read reports and they say breach and pings and attacks are all the same things, when they're really not, and it confuses the general populace when they're trying to secure themselves, and it makes this confusion. So with that said, how do you go about within your own departments trying to educate people and just the general public? How do you ensure that you spread basic cyber hygiene and you don't click this link or you don't do these bad practices? Or is it just going to have to be a generational thing where, we start in kindergarten where you say wash your hands, use the restroom. It's, when you open up a link, you make sure you know where it's coming from, et cetera, et cetera. So I would like anyone's views on that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's awareness is the first step, and then education and then training, and the progression of where you need to be if you want to achieve a higher level of security or of anything that can be trained. Now, funny you should say it's a generational thing. I'm afraid that the generation now that is most sort of cyber literate is at least cybersecurity literate. Look, my parents would never even give their credit card information online. Most of us don't even think about it, and younger folks, you send the password right along. So, I am not so sure that I'm not so optimistic. But certainly, if there's a concerted effort, to get people those basic concepts. And DHS has a lot of programs of, that Cyber Week. Actually, I drove in just now. There's a bus, the big Cyber Week, DC Cyber Week, sponsored by Northrop Grumman, and somebody else, I'm sure. But, so I mean, there is progress, but yeah, it should start much earlier. Should start, in sort of the elementary school level, possibly. How do you deal with these new devices as they come along, and have some basic principles? I mean, that's certainly the role of schools and nonprofits. I would want to say, though, it may be too much of an expectation that the general public understands the difference between, a botnet and something else. And again, that's from my perspective, because I'm really not so much on the threat side, understanding, of course, that for good defense, you need to know the threat to some degree, but I think it's much more effective use of resources, be that resources in business, be that resources, of somebody individual, reading the paper and only having so much attention, is to focus on your own vulnerabilities. So, what do I need to do? What can I do on my own system, right? I need to activate sort of the firewalls. Even though firewalls are kind of sort of last century, that's no longer the gold standard. But again, it needs to be part of a concept that tells people, okay, do what you can do. Don't worry about something you can't influence. For most of us, we can't influence the adversary. We don't even know the threat that's out there. But what you can do is secure your own system, and that's where it needs to start.
Yeah, very quickly. I just want to say, so I think before human behavior changes, technology companies will come up with a way to protect humans from our own bad decisions. And so, in the same way you can't stick your hand in a blender and blend it up because of the way it's constructed, I think someone will create a business model that this thing that we use for convenience we will not be responsible, or at least the responsibility will not be 100% on us to protect ourselves. Someone will devise a way so that we can't harm ourselves.
So that will occur through the free market or through regulation, though?
So I think it will be a free market solution that will need to be regulated on the backs because of privacy concerns.
Yeah.
In order to protect people, you will need a lot of their data, a lot of their behavioral pieces, and people will not be okay with giving up that much to where the computer can predict what they do. I mean, I get upset when my iPhone predicts what I'm going to type before I finish the word. So there will be a limit, but I think it will be a free market solution that is then regulated in order to protect privacy.
So we actually figured out that one second.
He figured it out.
I'm pretty proud of that, right? So I'm skeptically optimistic that we'll have a technical solution, because you find in life that humans will find a way to mess a lot of things up no matter what that solution looks like. You former military folks understand that pretty well. Just a couple of thoughts. So first, in the military, we're beginning to really drive at the culture associated with cyberspace capabilities. And not that we need a lot of experts out there, but to understand that when we have soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, et cetera, interacting with computers and equipment, that there is a threat in this environment because it's targeted against the national security fabric. And so we're going to great measures to be able to drive that kind of behavior, that thought process. Don't take these actions. There's a reason why, because you're putting not a communication systems in jeopardy, you're putting our command and control capability in jeopardy. You're not putting the computer that's out on the flight line in jeopardy. You're introducing risk to the weapons system that we're all here to be able to feel. Matter of fact, in the Air Force, our number one leader in the logistics and maintenance arena, Lieutenant General Cooper, just issued a 45-minute mandatory training for all maintainers and logisticians and the whole career field. We're talking tens of thousands of people out there that touch hardware in the field. They don't typically think of cybersecurity as part of their job. They got the number one person in the Air Force talking to them direct out there, and some mandatory training, and then follow-on activity behind that. So that's kind of the culture, the operational culture. This is not your father and mother's IT system. This is really like carrying around a loaded weapon. And so when you let a weapon discharge in the military, we handle that in a very different way than if we click on a link on a computer, right? And so we're beginning to change that culture and that mindset. And there are repercussions. Commanders have options now too, which is a little different. The second is, I like the construct of the few, the many, the all. And here's what I mean by that. In any organization, there are a few true experts that you need to make sure have the right training and professional development, and you're probably going to want to really retain those individuals. In any organization, no matter the size and shape, there are handfuls to dozens to hundreds of those depending on the size of the organization. And they're key to the security of your systems. Those are your true geeky experts that understand the domain, that understand the equipment, that understands your mission and what's important in those networks. There's the many, which I would describe as really the leadership in your organization, no matter where it is. at the highest levels in a large organization down through middle management, if you will, no matter what size of the organization. Those individuals need to understand what are the implications of the decisions that they're making, whether that's investment and how we're bringing new capabilities in, but to be able to think through and work with the right experts to understand the risk that they're introducing or mitigating by their decisions. And in a kind of crisis in terms of response, they're going to have responsibility directing actions, and they need to know where to go for help, and they need to have in the back of their mind what's happening in this domain. It's C-suite business, right? CEOs, COOs in the military, it's commanders. So we say this is now commander's business. The leadership needs to understand the risk that they're accepting. The commanders in our business need to understand the risk that they're carrying for the units that they're in charge of and how to mitigate that. And then the all is, how do we get everybody that's clicking on a link, that's touching the Internet of Things out there, whether that's information technology or operational technology, to be mindful of their behavior, the clean hygiene. There's some level of minimum training and expectations and then accountability on the back end that we need for each individual in an organization. That's the way we're thinking about it in the military. We're learning just like everybody else. And so we have some great organizations that do it really well, and we have some weak organizations, and we try to share best practices. And when you have, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, there's a lot of people touching things that don't always do it right. I can vouch. The final thought would be, and it goes back to the workforce development. I think in around the world, but in the United States, I think we need to encourage organizations, and I find there's some really great examples of doing this. And I'm proud in the Air Force, I'll point at one and just give you a couple facts and figures if you wouldn't mind bearing with me. It's called Cyberspace. It's an organization that is out through the Air Force Association. It's a nonprofit. They partner with industry, and they bring experts in, and they teach curriculum so that we can get into schools. And we do it in a couple of ways. We educate elementary students, and in the middle schools and high schools, we introduce a competitive environment. So we do education, a little bit of training on how to ethically hack, but more importantly, how to defend. That's really what we're trying to teach. A system, and that's really what it's about. And then we put them into a competition like robotics and those kinds of things. And then there's, you win in your city, and then you get to go to the regionals, and then you get to go to nationals. About 8 years ago, a couple hundred kids involved in that. Today, over 20,000 kids in the competitive category and thousands more in elementary school being educated. The reason it works is because it's a public-private partnership. There's not a lot of U.S. government dollars being thrown at. The Air Force is not putting a single dime into the program that's run out of the Air Force Association, but in partnership with aerospace companies, with cybersecurity companies, partnering. They love it. It's a recruiting ground for them. The difference is most kids, when they go to and they're graduating from high school, if you do any kind of sampling, well, typically there'll be a 12 to 20, maybe 18% interest rate in STEM education. I would argue every time we run, and we've been the team that runs this program, it's trackers on all the kids almost, but it's amazing. When they enter the program, it's a reflection of the school in general. When they come out of the program about 8 months later, we're hitting hit rates of 80 to 95% interest in STEM education. Not bad, but that's just a lot of talk. Now they've begun to track those kids when they come out of college, and they're hitting between 65 and 75% graduate rates in STEM degree programs. And the kids that don't go to four-year colleges are graduating at very similar rates out of junior college and tech colleges. And the ones that don't graduate or go off to college are entering the workforce as cybersecurity professionals because they have certifications coming out of some of these programs that they're in high school. So it's not about the 20,000, 30,000 kids involved in the Cyber Patriot program. How do we multiply that for the nation? That's really the key. Is how do we add another 0 or 2 to that number so that we're dealing with a larger denominator? And that's when we get after the human capital problem. And then even if I don't go into the cybersecurity arena, but I have an appreciation for it, it's kind of cool and it's geeky to be involved in cybersecurity as a kid or as a young adult. I think that's the answer for the nation. It's not a government program. It's how do we solicit and energize these public-private partnerships. It's good for the nation. It's good for industry. And we sure love our fair share in the military as well, but that gives us a bigger recruiting pool as well. So just the final thought. Thanks.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our session. I'd like to thank our panel for giving us not only their time, but some great information and sharing their knowledge with us. Would you join me in a round of applause, please? You probably saw on the way in, there are refreshments outside. I'm not sure if our panel members will be sticking around for any part of it, but if they are, please feel free to engage them. And thank you again for coming.